ladies and gentlemen, Nick Redfern.
Yay!
Hi, Nick.
Hi, Nick.
Hey guys.
Welcome.
Good. How are you?
How's it going?
Good.
Other than, well, as you know, certain technical issues, which I don't know what's going on, but my laptop, the camera stopped working and the audio is not working, and then I've had to put a fan underneath. It was starting to get warm, and which none of that's a good sign, you know. So.
Right.
It's on its last legs.
I think it means at some point in the very near, I'll need to get another one.
Oh,
But I mean, I view this as the opportunity for new tech, so I'm all about that.
I guess so.
I love new tech.
I'll try and look at it from the positive perspective,
Yes,
I guess.
new tech.
Oh.
I can send you records.
Can you get me now?
Oh, what's that?
You're able to get me on the you're able to get me on the show. We're not just talking to each other right now.
No, you're
No,
live.
we
All
are on the show.
the fans are just like
Live.
squealing, Nick, right now in the chat.
And Nick, my name's June. I haven't
Hi, June.
virtually met you before, so I just thought I'd introduce myself. So
Okay. Well, good
I
to
think
see
the
you
last
again.
time I was traveling around when we could still travel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like, welcome back.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it, Jake. I mean, you are the aficionado.
I am, and this is one of my favorite subjects. So if you hadn't heard, we're a little early. I don't care. Nick has a new
That's
book
okay.
coming out on August 4th. It's from Visible Ink Press, and it's all about one of my favorite monster subjects, monsters of the deep, about sea serpents, sea creatures, ocean monsters, killer fish, all that fun stuff. And so with Nick, my question for you is, how did the concept come up? How did the idea for this to be your next book?
Well, the subject of lake monsters and sea serpents and things like that has fascinated me for a long time. So I've always had an interest in it. So, you know, it's kind of inevitable that I'd end up doing a few books on that subject. And my interest in things like lake monsters go back to when I was a kid. And when I was about 5, my mum and dad took me on a week's vacation to Scotland. And of course, if you're going to go to Scotland, you've got to go to Loch Ness. And that's what we did. And I still have a few fragments of memories of my dad and me standing by the shore and him telling me the story of these strange monsters living deep in the loch. And, you know, Loch Ness is a sort of a atmospheric, creepy place. It's about 22 miles long and about 800 feet deep. And, you know, the landscape is very sort of dark and forested, wooded, and so it's surrounded by all these old crumbling castles. So it's kind of a very atmospheric place anyway, regardless of the Loch Ness monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And when my dad told me that story, it really kind of fired up my imagination. As I got a little bit older, 10, 11, I started reading books like Brad Steiger and people like that, and reading things about, you know, Ogopogo and Champ and all these other weird lake monsters. And so I've done a couple of books on this subject, one specifically just on the Loch Ness monster, but Monsters of the Deep, which, as you said, it'll be out in a couple of months. It's basically like a study of like monsters, sea serpents, giant squid, giant octopuses, and anything that's weird in the water. Hopefully I've got it in the book. So.
I was going to say, I was reading and it said over 100 profiles, and I'm like, this is like Dungeons and Dragons monster manual for sea creatures. So I'm like frothing, you know, at the mouth, waiting to get some of this stuff. So I guess we could step back here. So let's do some additional plugging. Okay. So you had a book on Nessie. which came out, it got updated in 2018, but I think it came out a bit before that. And you really went into depth about the history, the dark history, the strange phenomena that happens around the loch. So besides the Loch Ness Monster, which we know, what are some of the other creatures, phantoms? You even have an alien connection in there.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Nessie book is a bit different to most other Nessie books. You know, if you look at most of the books, they sort of go with the theories that they're plesiosaurs, that the plesiosaur was a marine reptile that lived alongside the same time as the dinosaurs, or that they weren't actually dinosaurs, they were marine reptiles, which are actually quite different. I won't bore you with all the science behind it.
Oh, no,
but,
go for the science. Yeah,
and,
go for the science.
And so a lot of people, you know, have written books said, oh, we think they're plesiosaurs, or they could be giant eels. But what I found doing a lot of research over the years, that there's a lot of weird paranormal stuff surrounding Loch Ness. For example, the famous cultist Aleister Crowley had a house on the shores of Loch Ness called Boleskine House, where he performed all sorts of rituals and rites to try and summon up supernatural creatures. And this was only not too long before people started to see these creatures more than they ever had. And the big sightings of UFOs at the loch, and Men in Black, and all sorts of weird stuff. So I decided with my Nessie book, which goes by the stunningly original name of Nessie, I thought I would go with the more of like the paranormal side, and look at the supernatural aspects, and also look at the supernatural theories for what these creatures could be rather than being you know, something that survived from the Jurassic era. And you know, when you're sort of bringing issues like paranormal phenomena into the issue of Nessie, of course, you know, some people are going to think, wow, that's cool, and other people are going to think, you know, Nick's gone completely mad or whatever. And but as I said, there are a lot of genuinely really weird stuff where people have tried to photograph these things, and very often, for some reason, the cameras jam and they get sort of mechanical and electronic problems. So there is a lot to this, I think, you know, the idea that they could be more than just unknown animals. So that one came out in 2016, but the rights came back to me 2 years later. So I put it out with another company, Lisa Hagen Books, and also updated that book and put a bunch more photographs in it as well, and artwork. And you know, it was received quite well for people who, you know, in the field of cryptozoology. And then I thought, well, instead of just doing another book on just another monster, why not sort of look at all the different types of ocean and water-based and, you know, river monsters, and try and do like you know, a definitive study of just about anything that's weird and you know, and lived in the waters.
Yeah.
We're still there?
Yeah.
I am.
Okay. All right. Sorry, it got so quiet, and I didn't know what exactly.
I think everyone around the world is experiencing this, especially because we're in prime time. Everyone's streaming, which hits bandwidth. So sometimes I don't know if there's a glitch where we cut out for a moment.
Okay.
Yeah, or not. But in that regard, Nick, so with Monsters of the Deep, I know, so I'm a big fan, so I have the Monsters book, which came out in 2017, also by Visible Ink Press. And you had 38 creature profiles in that one when it comes to sea and lake monsters. Did you expand on another like grouping, like river monsters or lake monsters versus in Monsters of the Deep versus Monsters, the Monster book?
Well, in that book, in the Monster book, there were kind of like entries, you know, sort of like 2 or 3 pages.
Yeah.
The big difference with the Monsters of the Deep is it's chapter based.
Oh, nice.
You know, the Monster book was almost like an A to Z, you know, like N for Nessie, and O for Ogopogo. That's how that book was, or B for Bigfoot, you know. But this one goes by subjects. So there's like one chapter on giant squids. There's a chapter on Nessie, a chapter on Ogopogo, a chapter on giant octopus and sightings by sailors. So there's a chapter on that, and then going back even further with, like, there's a chapter, for example, on the Kraken.
Yes.
And also there's the story of Jonah and the whale. I've even got that far back, you know, because if you read that story, you know, that doesn't sound like a whale, you know, but it sounds like something really weird and monstrous. So I go right back, you know, to the early days and up to the present day. But as I said, it's chapter based and theme based rather than just you know, doing it like the other one. I think people can approach it both ways. You know, I think the A to Z style's good because, you know, you can just dip in wherever you want to. You haven't got to go from page 1 to 300 or whatever. And with the new one, you know, you're not forced to read the chapters in chronological order. You know, if you see the contents and you want to go straight to the Nessie chapter, it's not going to affect you, you know, then jumping back 5 chapters on something else or whatever. So.
And then, go ahead, Wendy.
Oh, I was just going to ask Nick if I was watching that Science Channel deal, whatever it was. But back in 2005, they found that the shark that they had tagged, and they named her Alpha, and something had eaten her and her tag, and they went through and systematically ruled out what it might have been. Like, it wasn't another big great white shark. It was because the temperature was wrong for the digestion, and then it wasn't an orca attack, and I don't remember exactly why that one was. Oh, it was she was taken twice the depth of the deepest known orca pod to have dived, and then it wasn't a giant squid because, okay, I don't remember exactly why that one was either, but they decided it was, let me grab my...
I was going to say, with a squid and the way that it eats, it would have a different, like, you would, in the flesh of what's left over of the shark, it wouldn't match the beak or the serration on the suction cups.
That wasn't it, actually. The squid has a very narrow tube right behind its brain that all of the food has to go through, and the tag was too big to go through that ring or tube or whatever it is. And then we had the eyewitnesses of this great unknown 150-foot long creature sighted like all the way back in 1918, but they call it Lord of the Deep. I was just curious if you had found that story and if maybe included it.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting story, and it did actually get, back when the story first surfaced, it didn't just sort of attract people in the cryptozoology monster hunting field, but mainstream media covered it as well. And one of the theories that was put forward was that possibly it was a surviving one of, obviously there have to be more of them, you know, there couldn't just be one, but one of the theories was that it could have been a surviving relic, again from the Jurassic period, of a creature called Megalodon.
Megalodon, yeah.
Yeah, and Megalodon was a genuine, real, very ancient, primitive shark. But if you imagine something that broadly looks like the great white shark in Jaws, imagine something like that, but about 75 feet long.
I can even imagine.
That's what Megalodon was. You know, I mean, Megalodon would probably take on Godzilla and win, you know.
Kaiju versus dinosaur.
That would be awesome.
So, but yeah, the Megalodon was like the kind of apex predator of that period. And when this particular story broke about a great white shark having been sort of attacked and half eaten, there's not many animals in the fish. There aren't many animals in the oceans that would take on, a great white shark, but something did. And there have been reports, particularly off the coastal areas and slightly further out, in and around Australia. That's where more than a few of these megalodon sightings have been made of these gigantic sharks.
Wow.
So, if you consider how much of the world is actually water versus land, the water dominates the land. And I mean, there are, some of the oceans that the water is so deep that we just don't really have the technology to go to the ultimate, deep levels. So it's not at all impossible that creatures that, lived in and still live in the lower areas, the oceans, could stay there, quite happily, regardless of the fact that they're of a fantastic size,
Wow. I can't even imagine that. And of course, it would be around Australia where everything else is dangerous. And
well, yeah, I mean, they have a big enough shark population anyway. There's always people getting attacked by, sharks and losing a limb here and there. But that's what happens when you get in the ocean, I guess, in cold places.
I was going to say, I had just traveled overseas, and speaking of shark attacks, they've been finding off the coast of Mauritius and Réunion, which would be in would be in the Indian Ocean. They've had an excessively high amount, more so than Western Australia, of shark attacks. Now, they don't have great whites there. It's coming from bull sharks and I think even nurse sharks have done it, though nurse sharks aren't known to be as aggressive. But overall, we're starting to see sharks coming closer to mankind. Is it really just an overfishing thing? Is it ocean currents? What is drawing these sharks towards humans?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but I mean, animals are very clever. I think we often underestimate, animals. But I think, one of the possibilities is that, I mean, an animal that is a predator will actually very quickly realize where the food is, and so I think there could be that aspect to it, that, it doesn't take a large intelligent animal to know where to go every day, and follow the chase, so to speak. So I think that has a great deal to it, and it's hard to really sort of pinpoint, what that issue is, but I think a lot of it is just, that they know where to go, and when they know for sure, they'll stay in one particular area, and makes it easier for them,
Sure. You almost have to wonder if the rising, the melting ice caps and the rising water levels are having any effect in that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is a good point, because, I mean, certain water-based animals, they require warmer temperatures, others prefer colder temperatures. And, when we talk, it's interesting because, when we talk about global warming and things like this, we're sort of losing the ice. But what also happens, you've got animals that live in hot climates, and when you've got massive icebergs and, the temperature lowering, well, that has a direct effect on them, that the temperature's going up, but they, they're not sort of used to the massive amounts of ice, sort of melting in their area, and suddenly they've got like a plummet in those particular parts of the planet. They're expecting it to stay warm and hot, So, global warming doesn't just have an effect on, on the planet itself, but it also has a major effect on, what lives on land and in the water. I mean, penguins, polar bears, they've all been affected, by the effects that, with the polar areas.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing problems there as well. And, at the end of the day, it's sort of down to us, with the most large. Well, I would say we are the most intelligent species on the planet, but unfortunately, we're the most destructive species as well. So.
Yeah, I now when it comes to talking about the shift in the Antarctic, I thought this was really interesting. I saw this on a news report the other day. A pod of penguins, who are southern hemisphere, have now taken nest in Iceland. That's wild.
Well,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see that story actually, but I mean, again, it demonstrates, the ability of nature to adapt,
Mm-hmm.
and in the same way we have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as we are right now, all sitting at home looking out the window.
That's true.
It's either adapt or go crazy,
Yeah.
And so, I mean, as I said, I didn't see the penguin story, unfortunately, but
I'll drop in the chat.
Okay, cool. But animals are actually really good, at adapting to new climates, new locations, and nature does that. Nature's very good. I mean, if, for example, if you look at, excuse me, places where there was once people, and then there aren't any people there now, nature quickly takes over. You see the plants and weeds coming through the concrete, and you could easily see how, like, for example, Chernobyl,
that's
when there was the disaster in Russia and Chernobyl. If you look at footage and photographs of Chernobyl now, it kind of looks like something out The Walking Dead, with vines and trees bursting through all the old buildings, and it doesn't take long for nature to reclaim things. And if I mean, hopefully, what we're dealing with now, let's all hope, it doesn't last much longer, but who knows. But what I would say, in a really worse scenario, if there was something that wiped out the human race, the other animals that are left, which would be a huge amount, they would quickly adapt, and from 20, 30, 50, 100 years, the planet would be a radically different place, it would be ruled by animals, and
there's Planet of the Apes. There it starts.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what's fascinating anyway, with everybody staying indoors, especially in Italy and the canals. And you see dolphins in the canals again, and the water is clear. It is pretty amazing, I have to say. But I was thinking Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, I saw an article the other day about Yosemite Park and how quickly things are starting to change there. And for example, now Yosemite Park has the largest number of bears that it's ever had, and this is just in like a few months of people not being around there anymore because they're all at home, and the bear population, bears that sort of live maybe outside of the park, but in areas where that's suitable for them, they're all now moving into the park itself. It's far more denser, and for a bunch of other animals as well, they're all moving in, and because there's no one to park rangers or nothing like that, and so again, you could apply that to sort of water-based monsters and creatures as well. Survival for them, is like the prime thing. I mean, we kind of have it easy, really. We just go to Walmart or wherever to get your food. For animals, every day is a struggle and a fight to stay alive, and so they have a a better approach than we do. We kind of blunder around in disasters and whatever, but they, they are very, very quick and adept at doing what they've got to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you should see the rats in downtown Seattle, in the old part of Seattle, Washington. The rats have just taken over again in broad daylight. They're having little rat parties. It's crazy. Because there's no people, that are out in the streets hardly. So yeah, it's amazing.
June made a video of it.
Yeah, I had to make a video of it.
Rats actually make good pets. They're very intelligent rats. So people think they're like these dangerous, greasy.
No, they're
things,
very sweet when they're clean. When they're clean and they're not living in a sewer.
And rabid.
It's actually one of the most. What is one of the most cleanly animals of all? Cockroaches.
Oh.
Yeah, cockroaches are incredibly, almost like obsessed with cleanliness. You wouldn't think so because they eat out of like garbage cans or whatever, But as for themselves, they are, they're very intelligent, in terms of colonies, things like that. And but yeah, they're sort of known for cleanliness. Yeah.
And we're all cringing. Now, okay. Quick shift. When you were in Puerto Rico, chasing down vampires.
The Chupacabra.
Yeah, goat sucking vampires. That's Buffy the Vampire Slayer would be very happy to run across those, I think.
That would be awesome.
Now, were there any water creatures associated with that area? The Caribbean, I guess, and there.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole area is interesting. I've been on many expeditions to Puerto Rico looking for the Chupacabra. The first time I went was 2004, and the latest time was just a couple of years ago. And Puerto Rico is a really cool place. You've got the old city of San Juan, which goes back centuries, when the pirates were sort of roaming around there. And and you've got the modern day San Juan as well, and you've got this gigantic rainforest called the El Yunque rainforest, and it's within and around the rainforest that people from 1995 onward started seeing this being about the size and build of a full-grown chimpanzee. So it's about sort of 4.5, 5 feet tall, very muscular and fast-running, and but its skin was sort of like a greenish with mottles of brown, and it reportedly had like a row of spikes down its head and neck, kind of like a punk rock mohawk kind of thing. And,
super cool.
And it was described. It became known as the goat sucker because the Latin American term for goat sucker was Chupacabra. So that's where the name came from. And it got the name because a lot of ranchers who said their animals had been attacked by whatever this creature was, they said that significant amounts of blood had been removed from the bodies of, like, for example, goats, chickens, etc. And that's where the sort of blood-sucking vampire part of the legend began. And I've spoken to a lot of people on different ranges, like ranchers, veterinarians, police officers, local people in the villages and the towns, and I've been able to put together what for me is we're looking, I think, at a genuine animal of unknown origins. And the theories that have been put forward kind of vary. Some people think they're some sort of unknown kind of a reptilian type animal, kind of something along the lines of like a a sort of shrunken down version of like a velociraptor, something like that. Other people think, this is an interesting theory. Some people think they could be giant bats. Now we have giant bats anyway, but we're talking about something with a wingspan, because a lot of the reports talk about them having wings in Puerto Rico, and some of the people have talked about seeing these bat-like creatures, but with a body about 5 feet high and wingspans of like 15 feet, which you wouldn't want to mess with something like that.
No.
So there are a lot of different theories, and then you've got the sort of the occult, supernatural angle, where a lot of the people on the island think it's more like a devilish type creature rather than an unknown flesh and blood animal. But it's fascinating, how when it all kicked off in 1995, how the whole thing took hold, and the Chupacabra as a phenomenon really, sort of overwhelmed Puerto Rico in many respects. There's a lot of hysteria and panic, and people bringing the kids in early at night, in case the Chupacabra comes around, and it really, it did become sort of like a phenomenon. And but going to the island, as I said, and speaking to the locals and the eyewitnesses is really the best way. And I find that when you sort of sat opposite someone, you quickly become like a good judge of character. And from all the people I've spoken to, I think there is a real creature, but what it actually is, I don't know. But we're still looking. But we had this sort of second type of Chupacabra that surfaced round about 2003, 2004, particularly in Texas, and it became known as the Texas Chupacabra, which is basically like a hairless, dog-like animal. But it's very different to the creature on Puerto Rico, but both of them have been given the name Chupacabra. So it gets kind of puzzling sometimes for people, when they say, well, hang on, that one's got spikes and wings, and this one looks like a hairless dog. But that is the sort of puzzling bit about it, and controversial bit, that there are now two Chupacabras by name, but they have nothing to do with each other.
Now, did anything come of the DNA tests on the chicken feathers that your friend had?
Oh, well, yeah, that's an interesting part of the story. I did a show with a friend of mine, John Downs. John runs a full-time group in the UK, the CFZ. It's the Centre for Fortean Zoology. And Fortean is named after Charles Fort, who was a guy who investigated weird mysteries about a century ago. So anything that is Fortean means it's kind of like born out of Charles Fort's research. And so John runs the Centre for Fortean Zoology. And in 2004, we went out to Puerto Rico with a team from the Sci-Fi Channel. And it was from a show called Proof Positive. And I'm not sure if you can still find the episodes online, but they were online, like on YouTube for a while. They've probably been taken down for that reason. But and we went out there for about 8-9 days, something like that. That was my first time there, and John's second time. And Proof Positive was kind of like a cross between, I guess, something like the X-Files meets CSI, because they wanted like forensic evidence that could be analysed. And when John went there the first time, he examined a chicken that had allegedly been killed by a Chupacabra, and the owner gave John some feathers as a sort of a going away present, if you like, kind of a strange one. But and so the Sci-Fi Channel was quite excited by the possibility that there could have been Chupacabra saliva on these feathers, and they, and if they came up as a regular animal, or if it just came up as something that wasn't currently classified, then we might have something important. Unfortunately, when John went to Puerto Rico the first time, it was 1998, and when we went, it was 2004. So it was 6 years, and unfortunately, all the DNA that was on there, even the chicken DNA itself, had sort of degraded.
Oh,
so
no.
we didn't get any definitive answers. But again, we did speak to a lot of people who'd seen these creatures. Interestingly enough, one woman, a lady named Norca, who we interviewed, she'd had an encounter. But this was back in 1975, 20 years before the Chupacabra was actually acknowledged as being around. But if you look back into the old newspapers from Puerto Rico from the 70s, you can find stories of what sound actually very much like the Chupacabra, but which didn't actually surface till 1995. So what I think is that it's actually an old phenomenon, but these animals skillfully were able to hide out until 1995, until they were seen. So I think that's an important thing to note. People say, well, how come it just popped up out of nowhere? And I always say, well, if you actually go back and you speak to the people and look in the old newspapers, you'll see that there was reports of animals being attacked and killed and drained of blood going back for years and decades. For example, if you look for Mocha vampire, M-O-C-A, on Google and just do a search on it, you'll see that the Mocha vampire was something very much like the Chupacabra back in the 70s, but just with a different name. So, I think they could actually have been on Puerto Rico, hiding out in stealth for a very, very long time, but nobody really realized until 1995.
Interesting. Almost have to wonder if they've survived all of the hurricanes and earthquakes down there now.
Well, I mean, it's not impossible. I'll tell you for why, because one of the intriguing theories as to why we haven't caught any yet is because they live in the caverns and caves on Puerto Rico. Now, I didn't realize until the first time I went to Puerto Rico how extensive some of the cave systems are on Puerto Rico. I mean, they're huge. And even the government itself and the wildlife people on Puerto Rico admit that some of those cave systems are actually so deep and difficult to get into that no one has ever gone down some of them. So one of the theories is that they hide out in the caves during the day, in the higher levels of the El Yunque rainforest, and then at night they come down to hunt to the lower levels where the farms are, and then at night, and then when they're finished, they go back into the caves. And we went in some of these caves as well, and I mean, some of them are quite big openings, but then the further you go in, there's sort of these offshoots as well. And I managed to squeeze through one of them for about 50 feet, and then it just became impossible, and I had to kind of like awkwardly turn around and crawl back out again. And I mean, if you look at the ceilings as well, it kind of looks like the ceiling's moving, but what it actually is, there's like literally like thousands of bats just sort of clinging on the ceiling.
Man.
One of the guides said to us, he said, don't kind of look up too often because some of those bats have got rabies, and the last thing you want is, they'll be staring up with your mouth wide open, and then you get a bit of bat saliva in your mouth.
Well,
you'd be like kind of like, you'd end up like Ozzy Osbourne, when he bit the head of a bat, it'd be kind of the equivalent of that. And I didn't really want to go through that. So.
No,
I understand.
We need it.
Yeah. Kind of makes being the phrase being batshit crazy takes it to a whole new level.
Whole new level. Oh my gosh.
But that's, guys, listening, everybody, that's from the Chupacabra Road Trip, which is one of Nick's books, and it's a wonderful read. I really highly recommend it. I haven't quite finished, but I'm almost there, and then I will go leave reviews and things.
I've dropped it in the chat.
I won't tell you how it ends. Yeah, it's called Chupacabra Road Trip because it's sort of written in a road trip style. I always think, you can write in one of two ways. One is just to write the facts and the data, and the other one is to do it from like a diary perspective, where the reader can follow you sort of on the adventure. And because this was all expedition based between 24 and 2016, thereabouts, 2017, and that kind of lended itself to writing it from the perspective. It was a dark and stormy night, and I headed out into the jungle. That's how I kind of wrote that book, because it was more, as I said, it lended itself more to doing it that way, rather than writing it just as just the data.
Right, a manual almost. Yeah. No, I agree. It was it really brings you in, and you're kind of there. Even the disappointment of finding out that a ranch in Puerto Rico is quite a bit different than a ranch in Texas.
Yeah, that's one of the one of the things I found on Puerto Rico. That there's sort of very varying degrees of levels of life. You have a lot of the people, unfortunately, they're very poor areas, and their farms are literally their backyards, and struggling, to make a living. And then in the hills, you've got, it's kind of almost like going in the hills of Hollywood, with sort of huge houses on the slopes and things like that. And so, but it's a really cool place, all the people are very friendly, and the food's really good, and it's got like a really, really nice, cool vibe to it. And as I said, it's Old San Juan. I mean, it is kind of, somebody dropped you in the middle of Old San Juan, you would think you'd sort of time traveled to like Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yes,
that's what it looks like. You could imagine the old galleons, coming up to the shore, and the skull and crossbones on the ships, and because a lot of the old buildings literally go back, 300 years thereabouts, when the pirates really were there, and that hasn't been changed, and that it's a good thing. I think it's good that they've hung on to the the old
the history
Puerto Rico used to look,
No, I visited the one fort there and Old San Juan itself, and that was it was so neat, so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
And hot. It was really hot.
Yeah. Yes, that is one of the things. You do need a lot of water, and particularly when you're sort of stomping through the rainforests at the height 2 in the afternoon, and
that's why they have siestas.
Yeah, the people who live there, they've grown up with it. I remember saying to one of the guys, I said, What's the temperature? And he's like, oh, it's only 112. I was like, oh my God.
And with probably 90% humidity too.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, oh my God. I actually thought at one point, I'm going to live to see the end of the week,
Yeah.
They have to get a stand-in for me or something.
Exactly. Oh my gosh.
You become a Texas snowman, which is just a puddle in a pair of boots. Well, Jake, you want to take it back?
Well, I do have a question from the audience, and it's in regards to In Search of Monsters, which, Nick, you were an expert on that series. It was from Travel Channel, and the question is, will it be back? They haven't seen any news about it.
No, I don't think it will be. I would like it to be. That, for people who may not have seen it, it was on the Travel Channel, and it ran for about 12 episodes, I think, or 10, 11, something like that. And there's one on Bigfoot, one on the Yeti, Chupacabra, large cats, and
the Wendigo.
The list went on. The Wendigo, that's right. Yeah.
That was my favorite episode.
You know it better than me. and it was a good show. It was there was some like in the studio sort of talking head kind of stuff, and then they had sort of special effects and recreations of sightings and things like that. So it covered all the different areas and the different theories for what these things might be, but whether it will come back, I don't know. I mean, it'd be cool if it did. But sometimes you'll find a show, will pop up for one season or two, and then, the production company just then goes on to a cooking show or something else,
Yep.
Cooking with Chupacabra. That's gonna.
That would be an interesting.
Let me show you my pollo recipe. But then, what other do you have? Are you lined up for any other, say, TV shows or other media appearances anytime soon?
Well, I mean, I do a lot of TV. I probably do usually about 7 or 8 episodes of varying shows. I don't mean 7 or 8 of all the different shows, but like sort of 7 or 8 episodes collectively, throughout the year. But I mean, the way things are now, production companies really aren't doing much at all. But I did the most recent one that I was on and that I did was Ancient Aliens on. It was the episode called The Real Men in Black, and that was filmed, I think, last October, and it was broadcast about 2 months ago. And I think that one, because it's relatively recent, I think you can go to the History Channel's website and you can find it on there, and I think you can download that episode. And as I said, it's called the Real Men in Black, and that's one of my other big interests is the Men in Black mystery, and so they put that episode together, and there's quite a bit where I'm talking about the origins of the Men in Black mystery, and the different theories for who they are, and but as I said, I'm pretty sure that episode is still somewhere on the History Channel's website.
I dropped the link.
I was gonna say, I think it's on Netflix too, isn't it?
Yeah, and you can.
Isn't it on Netflix? Yeah.
Yeah, and you can stream it through your cable provider too.
It's on demand.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Oh, good.
The one subject we didn't cover with Monsters of the Deep, and I want to get this in just in case we switch subjects, is in the summary, the footnotes, it talks about mutant fish, some kind of genetic chimeras by pollution, and I'm totally fascinated by this.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, environmental pollution, is an issue that affects all of us, really, or it can do at least. And a lot of it's caused by what are called mutagens. Now, a lot of pollutants basically give off what are called mutagens, and basically mutagen, for example, one of the most destructive is sulfur dioxide, and this is used in variety of industries, particularly coal burning. And if you get this particular mutagen in your body, in a worse scenario is if it's like a pregnant woman, because it can literally get into the DNA of a developing baby or a developing animal, and can cause all sorts of terrible genetic alterations, sort of on a smaller level. But to give you an idea, back in the 1990s, wildlife experts in Minnesota found that a lot of frogs were being born with like one front leg, or in some cases 3 front legs, and extra eyes, and really strange mutations. And it turned out that this was due to mutagens. They were being literally altered. And this has also been suggested, for example, like at least some strange creatures. For example, it's been suggested that mutagens may have caused sort of large eels, which can grow up to about 12 to 14 feet long, but to actually cause like a form of what's called gigantism. where gigantism in people, the upper level is round about 8 feet, and people of that tall really cannot get around too well. And this is one of the theories for some lake monsters, that they could have been affected by mutagens which caused them to develop a form of gigantism, which essentially would, make them look like a monster. I mean, it's giant eels can be extremely dangerous. As I said, they can grow to about 12 to 14 feet. But if you imagine sort of a mutagen-altered giant eel of, say, 40 feet long with a body the size of an oil drum, that kind of thing, you probably wouldn't quibble that that's a monster, if you saw that coming towards you. So I think it's possible that some strange creatures, at least, could be the results of mutagens and which have developed in a very abnormal way. And again, it demonstrates, how we are now starting to play a role, if you like, in the future development of at least some animals, and how they're being affected as well, or in some cases how they're actually successfully adapting to it as well. So, there's a lot of interesting aspects when it comes to, pollution and the science surrounding it, and how it could actually, in a very strange way, we're inadvertently creating our own monsters, so to speak.
You think about that.
I've worked on one of the local coal burning power plants here in Kansas City, and in the surrounding areas along the river, there's tons and tons of deer. And, somebody talked about going down there hunting, and I was like, I wouldn't hunt down there at all, because, what have these deer been ingesting all this time? Not worth it, guys.
It's very smart.
You're right. I mean, that's one of the important things that a lot of people very often forget, is that if you've got areas where, you've got chemicals and things like this, and, they're ingested by the animals, and it's a particular animal that we eat as well, it's kind of like similar to, all the antibiotics and steroids and everything else that's put in meat today. I mean, a lot of people just don't think about that, but it is a fact. It's, the animals are filled with this and filled with that, and you don't really know what the long-term scenario is. Over multiple generations, really.
Indeed, so.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah.
I'd like to even talk a little bit about the Kraken.
Thank you for asking.
Well, it's one thing. You see the different Krakens on different movies and different shows, and they present them as so many different creatures. And can you talk a little bit about what you think the Kraken is, and
Yeah. Well, I hate to sort of, destroy some sort of cherished
from Clash of the
Yeah, sorry, I have to be the bad guy now. But
that's okay. We can talk about giant squids after this.
Yeah. What I think with the Kraken is that what I think about a lot of so-called mythological monsters, and that is, I don't think they were mythological. What I do think is a lot of these strange creatures that go back, tales of them go back centuries, maybe, 900 years, maybe even longer than that. And over time, I think mythology and folklore has very much kind of changed them from what they really were to how, they become recognized today. Now, if you look at the Kraken in movies, it's like this gigantic, monstrous thing, which, I actually think the Kraken is. But I mean, Hollywood does a good, does a good job of, turning the Kraken into this gigantic thing that, bringing up Godzilla again, that would take on Godzilla,
with 8 arms,
yeah. And it, it was described as like the ultimate sort of gigantic sea monster. But if you look at some of the locations, for example, Scandinavia is where, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, you've got a lot of reports of the Kraken hundreds of years ago in those areas. Now, what's interesting is that there have also been sightings, but in latter days, of giant squid. And, giant squid can grow to like 50, 60 feet, from tentacle to head, so to speak. So I think what's happened is that back centuries ago, when people saw what they thought or what they called the Kraken, what I think they were actually seeing were gigantic squid. And, if you look at some of the bodies of giant squid that occasionally get washed up, they are monsters. They're huge. They're gigantic animals. And so I think what's happened over the years, and what often happens just in life, stories get exaggerated. Like the fisherman who says he caught a 6-foot, fish, and then 10 years later, oh no, it was 12 feet long.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's always kind of, a tendency to exaggerate it bigger rather than smaller. And so I think that's what happened. I think the sailors who were out, fishing, because, they are sort of, those areas are filled with fish. So I think the fishermen who were out there probably did see giant squid, and there probably were far more than there are today. And, with a little bit of exaggeration and friend of a friend, and somebody tells somebody else and somebody tells somebody else, I think that's how the legend of the Kraken began. But the important thing is, and this is a perfect example, but there are many other examples as well, the important thing is that they are real animals, or they were real animals that got blended into folklore. That's basically what I think's happened.
Right. Started with a kernel of truth and
yes,
honesty, and then we're blown out of the water.
Definitely see that.
Yeah.
So you see all the old paintings with the the huge galleon ships with the
Well, yeah, I've actually got I will have a lot of those in the book. The publisher, Visible Ink Press, they do a really good job of getting artwork, and they've got, I think, like 120 sort of old, really cool paintings and artwork going back sort of the 1500s, with ships being pulled down by these huge tentacles, and sort of a sailor swallowed by a squid or whatever, and so they've got some cool, some cool paintings and things like that to sort of, which are kind of like be representative of that era, So as the story of the chapters go from, 1,000 years ago to the present day, the artwork kind of reflects the eras as well, and the paintings and photographs.
Neat. And probably the uneducated sailors and their interpretations, undoubtedly.
Well, yeah, I think, anyone who sees anything that's kind of weird, it's sort of difficult to sort of, when you're looking at it amazed, to try and take in every bit about what you saw and what it was and how big was it and what were the color. And, it's kind of like when people see a really bad car accident, you sometimes people just stand there and in shock, and you ask them a week later, it's all hazy because your mind sometimes, blocks things out. If it's like really kind of, terrifying.
Self-protection.
Yeah, but also, things that you're not used to, and they suddenly come out of nowhere and then they're gone. You're focusing so much on the amazement that you don't always get the data. So I think that, but that's not, it's not lying or anything or exaggerating as such. It's just how the human brain can sometimes get sort of skewed, if you like, when unforeseen, strange things happen. So.
Sure. And then it starts to try to rationalize it so it can be understood.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I just dropped a link talking about the migration of critters and giant cephalopods. This past summer, researchers found the giant squid off the coast of Louisiana in the Gulf of Mexico.
Wow.
I dropped the video and it's not a prank like the penguin thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It really happened. You've got the footage.
Yeah, that's always an argument, when people are arguing with me about certain things that they don't believe are real, and even though there were so many witnesses, and for how many years, I mean, did people say that there was no such thing as the giant squid, and now all of a sudden there's more and more sightings of really giant squids, and it's like, see, yeah, exactly. One of these days it's going to happen.
One of these days, it's going to be the Bigfoot.
Yep. And then who's going to be right now? Ben.
Well, funnily enough, I actually have a chapter in the book on Bigfoot. Now, you might think,
just wait,
why
what?
on earth? Yeah,
Does he swim?
You might think, why on earth is there a chapter on Bigfoot in a book called Monsters of the Deep? And one of the reasons why is that a lot of people don't know or don't realize that there are actually a lot of reports of people seeing Bigfoot creatures swimming in lakes and rivers and diving for fish and things like that.
Oh, wow.
And so I've included this chapter, kind of like a bit of the off-the-wall type chapter, but it demonstrates that, everybody thinks Bigfoot is just this creature wandering around the woods, but there are actually, as I said, a lot of reports of people seeing them often late at night, sort of splashing in the water, and like a bear, when the same way bears, sort of follow the flow of the water and and grab the fish. And there's also a lot of reports showing people Bigfoot sort of racing through the waters, almost like an Olympic swimmer. And so I've included that chapter of to demonstrate, that the lesser known aspect of Bigfoot, that they actually spend a significant amount of time in the water.
Interesting.
Neat.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, can we get the full contents of the book? I'm joking.
I think I'd even have trouble doing that. It's actually like 150,000 words, and I think it's I think it's 400 pages.
We've got time.
But Visible Ink Press, well, you probably know, but all their books are kind of done in the same style. They're all 400 pages, 150,000 words, and approximately 120 pictures or artwork. And that's what they become sort of known for, is putting out these kind of encyclopedic books rather than just your average paperback or whatever. But I mean, they're good in the sense that they give me sort of 6 months to do the book, and which is a good amount of time for a book of that length. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
I was going to ask that. Where exactly? We know the book comes out August 4th, 2020. Paperback and Kindle formats, or the EPUB format. And then, so where is it currently in process? I'm just thinking, will it drop early? I'm just saying.
Well, I don't really have any sort of control over that. I mean, so occasionally my books have been put out earlier than planned, and like a big breaking story that's relevant to the book. But the way the process goes, my agent Lisa, who also runs Lisa Hagen Books, and she's the one who republished the Chupacabra book and the Nessie book. Lisa basically does the contract work and all the legal stuff with the publishers, and that's why she gets her cut, because I don't understand any of that kind of lawyer stuff, whatever. So,
Right.
Lisa does all that, and then I put together like a synopsis idea for the book, and the publisher likes it. They'll ask me to do like 2 sample chapters, and I'll do those, send it off, and if they hopefully say yes, and then I start writing the book. And that usually, as I said, depend on the length of the book. One of the Visible Ink Press books, that would take about 5 months, and then I hand it over to them, and then when they go through it and edit it and see, and luckily my books don't get edited that much, and they don't take chunks out of the books or anything like that.
That's nice.
And from there, then the whole thing is turned into like a PDF with the artwork, and they have a guy, Kevin, and he does all that. He converts the Word document into a PDF, and then inserts all the artwork and designs and fonts and all that. And that's actually where it is right now. It's at the PDF design, font, etc., etc. So in theory, it probably could come out a bit earlier, but the chances are it probably will come out on the planned time, unless of course a Nessie washes up on the shores of Loch Ness, and then I'm sure they try and find a way to get it out within a week or something. I guess
probably.
Yeah, I was gonna say I really love the cover to Monsters of the Deep with the tentacles.
Thanks. Yeah, they did a good job.
Yeah. So props to the artist who made that. I do have another question for you from the audience, and that is, do you have any tips for someone who wanted to become this type of, say, reference writer that Visible Ink Press publishes?
Well, yes. I think if you want to be a writer, there's several things to sort of be aware of. I mean, unless you're sort of J.K. Rowling or Stephen King, you're not going to be a millionaire. Writing. I love what I do. When I finished school at 17 in England, I wasn't really that good a student, to put it tactfully, and I just wasn't. I didn't go to college. I didn't go to university. I was one of these just, I'm out of here, and just out of I guess luck, fate, whatever you want to call it. But the little town that I lived in at the time, when I was about 17, they were advertising. They're putting together like a What's On kind of magazine for teenagers, etc. And it would have interviews with like local bands and who's coming into town and what's on, that kind of thing. So like a What's On magazine. I did that for about 2 years, and as I said, it was just pure luck that I got that job. But they taught me all the sort of tips of journalistic approach, etc., how to structure articles and write, etc. And I did that for a couple of years. It sort of dropped off, and I did for about 3 years. I then did sort of part-time stuff, doing writing. I had a regular job as a forklift driver in a warehouse. I did that for about 4 years, and then I'd come home and do a few hours on the writing. And I was about 26 when I decided that I'm not going to spend the next 40 years working for some old guy, and I've got to wear a suit and tie, which I hate, and so I said I'm going to do something on my own terms, and I decided I wanted to be a writer. So I put a few ideas together for publishers, and went from there really. And I got a book deal, a 3-book deal with a Simon and Schuster for 3 books on UFOs, which is one of my other big interests. But in terms of writing, I mean, the most important thing, of course, is the story, and you need to sort of, the first part, the introduction, you really need to sort of grab the attention of the reader, because the worst thing you can do is open a book and the first 2 pages, make you yawn. You really kind of grab the reader and make it informative, but make it enjoyable and readable. As I said, I mean, if you're talking about like a Bigfoot encounter, if you've got all the data, don't just say, the witness saw Bigfoot. Say something like, the Bigfoot creature was seen, and its huge crunching feet, was sort of pounding on the floor, and there was a full moon, shone on the creature's glowing red eyes, that kind of thing. People like to be kind of entertained and on the edge of the seat. So that's one of the most important things, is that you could have all the data, all the facts, all the evidence, but if it reads like you read in the alphabet, it can be the worst thing possible. So I always tell people, if you got something to write about, have a go, because I think everybody, I always say that everybody has a book, at least one book in them, and whatever the subject is. But of course, one of the most important things, if you're going to do kind of expedition road trip type books that I do, you really sort of need to get out there in the field. And so, if you people listening now, I'm sure in every town or city or whatever, everybody knows of one story of like a weird mystery, sort of the ghostly woman at the old bridge or whatever, that kind of thing, or Mothman was seen once, that kind of thing. I would sort of encourage people, well, why don't you do a little story or do some research on it, and then do an online article, something like that, and then collect more information, and maybe you'll have a book put together. And it's not like you're sort of figuring out how to go to the moon. I mean, it's just writing your experiences, doing it in an entertaining and informative fashion. And perhaps most important of all, if you've got a scoop, on something that no one else has, publishers like books like the kind I do, but they also, it's a publisher's dream to have somebody come to them and say, hey, I've got a body of a Bigfoot, that kind of thing. And they're like, okay, keep this quiet. This is going to be the biggest book in the century, So scoops and something really new. And as I said, I didn't start off as some grand writer, I was a kid driving a forklift and then going home and doing about 2 hours of writing at night, trying to perfect a style, I was
sounds like you were disciplined, though. It sounds like you're really disciplined then.
Well, actually, I am. I tell you what I like to do, and again, this may be of interest to people who like to write. You can sort of overload yourself where you get right, and that ends up with like writer's block, where you're so frazzled. So what I like to do, I generally work sort of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in my office room. I never work evenings, and I never work weekends. I like to sort of, for me, evenings and weekends to have a good time,
Right.
So that's basically what I do. And I find that by working 9 to 5 and having the weekend off, having the evenings off, I don't get sort of frazzled and fried, which I probably would. Well, I know I would if I was to do this like 24/7. I couldn't do it. I would have just monster overload or whatever.
Yes.
But what I would say, I mean, everybody has different ways. I have some friends who like they enjoy sort of working through the night. But I get up, have breakfast, mess around on Facebook for half an hour or so, and then do the work, have lunch, stop at 5, and I actually at 5 o'clock I put my laptop into sleep mode, and I don't touch it again till the next morning. And Friday afternoon about 4 o'clock when I stop, that laptop goes into sleep mode. I don't touch that laptop till 9 o'clock Monday morning then. And
Wow.
I'm not
That's great.
to check email or nothing,
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, well, I figure, I mean, I know we live in sort of a high-paced world, but I figure that somebody emails me, it's not the end of the world if I don't respond until the next morning, because there could be 20 emails and
Right.
Yeah. So, I like to, I mean, a lot of what I do, people think I live this kind of well, I guess I do live in kind of like a very strange world, really. But I mean, it's much of it isn't. I mean, sort of Friday nights, I take a girlfriend out, for dinner. Saturday, I often go out with a bunch of friends to see the local soccer playing. Soccer's one of my big things. So, I like to, just have regular time and normal stuff as well as racing around for big hairy monsters and long neck monsters,
Right. One thing I'd really like to know, with all the controversial topics that you do write on, have you ever had some like really, kind of terrifying close encounters? Yourself. Has anything happened because of some of the things that you have written on? I'd like to know.
Like the black helicopters
hovering
over the apartment
anything,
or something.
kind of strange, that's happened to you.
Has the man come after you?
Well, I've had a few weird things over I'm not sort of one of these people who, something goes wrong or something weird happens and, I don't sort of shaking at the legs or nothing like that. That's not really, I'm more sort of gung-ho. I have more of a gung-ho approach to life rather than, hiding behind the curtains or whatever. But I have actually had a few weird things over the years, like strange phone calls and not so much threatening calls, but I've had a few occasions, I've had weird calls where people have basically kind of demonstrated that they knew about stuff that I was working on that no one else did know. And it was obviously done to intimidate me, to kind of, I guess, to try and make me paranoid. Well, how did this person know what I was doing, and they claimed military backgrounds and that kind of stuff. And it probably was true because they genuinely did find out things that only me and Lisa, my agent, knew about, but somehow these people did. And so, there's a few occasions like that. I can't say, I've never had sort of like a man in black push me up a wall with a gun or nothing like that. It's not, it hasn't got to that point. But there have been a few, but there have been a few weird situations along those lines. But I'd say one of the strangest things that I do get a lot of, and that's a lot of synchronicities. And I never avoid synchronicities because I think they're sort of an important part of life, even if we don't fully understand. And if there's any people listening who don't know what synchronicities are, it's basically a term that means like a coincidence that seems more than a coincidence. In other words, something happened to you and it seems so bizarre that there's no way this could have happened. It was too coincidental. Kind of the sort of thing where you think about somebody you haven't thought of for 3 years and then they suddenly phone you 10 minutes later. That's kind of like a synchronicity. It's beyond being a normal coincidence. And I always follow synchronicities because I think, they do kind of put you on a pathway, and that's more sort of, I guess, like a paranormal aspect, which I also do quite a bit of that writing as well. And as I said, I think, if you ignore synchronicities, well, you don't go down the path that you may have done. So that's why I always try and understand what the synchronicities are about and try and follow. And I have had some really weird stuff where, I'm looking for information on a story and I just cannot find it, or, it's just not available, or there's some problem. And then, the next day, something really weird will happen and somebody will put, talking to me, and then I realise, this person can help me with this or that, and everybody has a weird coincidence now and again, and I find that get more of them as well. So, there's a lot of people in these fields who just go for sort of biological, animal-based stuff, in cryptozoology and different things. But, I have a big interest in the paranormal as well. I've written quite a bit on things like the black-eyed children and sort of ghostly animals, things like this.
We might have an upcoming episode on that. I'll hit you up, Nick.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I did a book 2 years ago called Paranormal Parasites, which has the black-eyed children on the cover, and it was basically a study of how throughout history there are a lot of stories of supernatural beings that kind of psychically feed on us. Things like the incubus and the succubus and things like that, and people feeling drained of energy by so-called
energy vampires,
energy vampires, psychic vampires, that kind of thing, and I think that's possibly what the black-eyed children are. They're kind of like a psychic vampire almost. So actually, cover a lot of areas that sort of border on like the occult as well. It's, that's all a big interest of mine as well. So I try and keep stuff varied. I might do a lake monster book and then a Bigfoot book and then one on paranormal parasites, the black-eyed kids, and then a conspiracy one, and then another creature one. So, I like to sort of mix it up a little bit.
Sure. June and I are kind of trying to get a show together with stories of the boogeyman from around the world. And we're having some difficulty getting real life stories. We can find different ones on the internet and whatnot. What would you suggest might be a good avenue to go to get personal stories from people?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, from my perspective, I actually get a lot of feedback. I mean, this is very different from the approach, you've got your radio show. But when I'm on shows like yours, or I guess any show, chances are that the next day, there'll be 2 or 3 emails or Facebook messages. Hey, somebody says, hey, I heard you on the show last night and wanted to let you know that I saw something like that, or I experienced something that you talked about on the show. I'll probably find, there'll be 4 or 5, 6 messages, perhaps on Facebook tomorrow morning. And so I always respond to people. I feel, people, are good enough to contact me and want to chat. I feel it's important to, to give something back as well. If they want help or advice, or, they just want to chat, I'm always happy to do that. And very often, people will say, if you'd like to use the story, feel free to. And sometimes, they'll say, and this is my name, or other times, they'll say, could you just put it under an alias or just leave a name out altogether?
Right.
And it's always preferable to have names, but I would never push someone to, share a story or push to use their name.
Right.
Because I think, that's wrong to do that where they suddenly see their name pop up in a book, And so I guess really sometimes there's no sort of particular way of getting people, I don't think. For me, they come to me rather than, me sort of going out looking for people. But it usually is, as I said, through radio shows like yours. People listen and then people contact you. But yeah, I don't really know why you're not getting that many.
Well, one, like a lady in South Africa, her aunt told a story that just terrified the whole family. And she was going to get with her aunt and, put it into words. And I told her it was up to her, however she wanted to do it. And we could, keep the names covered up or anything. Yeah. But when she went to her aunt and asked her to, put it down, the aunt said, no, I don't want to, because that can bring the attention of that entity back on her or the family or anything. So there's also that aspect.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, I mean, actually, I've come across a number of cases like that where people felt that just thinking about some of the more supernatural creatures, you're thinking about them or telling people about them, they were worried that the entity would come back, and and make it even worse for them, like poltergeist activity and just, things in the house, etc., that kind of thing. But I think more than anything else, it's sort of word of mouth and publicity, the net. I guess I can only sort of speak about it from my perspective, but it genuinely does come through, people who just happen to be listening to something, or they see an online article and they think, well, that's just like what I saw. That's kind of how it works for me.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll hope we see some maybe tomorrow.
Yeah. That's mysticmooncafe@gmail.com.
That's right. With all the books that you've written, I haven't seen any on just, I guess you'd say regular ghosts. Are there any plans on, like paranormal investigations or regular ghosts? I was just kind of curious.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I really haven't written anything hardly ever. Maybe a couple of things, but hardly ever written anything on ghosts. And people often ask me that, why haven't you written anything on ghosts? And the main reason is that I don't know why, but it just doesn't really interest me. Haunted houses and all this kind of poltergeist. Poltergeist stuff does actually interest me, but sort of tales of ghosts and things like that. It just doesn't really sort of get me fired up and excited. I don't know why. Strange creatures. Yeah, strange creatures, supernatural creatures, but haunted houses and things like. I don't know. It's just something I can sort of take it or leave it. And one of the big ironies is that I actually wrote a chapter in one of my earlier books about a ghost, and it actually involved one of my old dogs, Charity, and when she died, and had a lot of weird stuff in the 2 or 3 days afterwards, and that was sort of the first time I really got into the angle of like pet ghosts and animal ghosts, that kind of thing, which that interests me a lot. But for some reason, I just can't get excited by haunted houses and night vision and all. I don't know.
I understand.
Right.
But I guess there's somebody's interested in Bigfoot, somebody's interested in Area 51. We all have a pet,
something that gets your passion going. Yeah.
I was trying to remember. Was it your dad's experiences while he was piloting that got you kind of interested in the UFOs?
Yeah. Well, he actually wasn't a pilot. He was. I shall have to tell him that he was. He was called a pilot on the radio. He'll like that.
Okay.
But he was actually a radar mechanic in the British Royal Air Force, which is the equivalent of the US Air Force. Okay. And he was like one of the guys. If the radar equipment wasn't working properly, if it was screwing up, they would get somebody like my dad in to look at all the equipment and try and figure out what was going wrong with the radar. And and he was actually involved in 3 nights of radar-based UFO encounters back in 1952. And he's still around now. He's pushing 90 now, but he still runs around like a madman, and awesome. Still remembers it all. And but yeah, he was involved in September 1952 during a NATO exercise in September 1952, where there were a number of UFO encounters, and it was basically like a demonstration to the Russians. Hey, we've got all this technology, all these battleships and planes. If you plan anything, this is what we've got to hit back with. So it was like a big NATO operation. And funnily enough, it was called Operation Mainbrace. And just about a month or so ago, the History Channel on their Project Blue Book show, they actually turned that real in Operation Mainbrace. They made that one of the episodes of Project Blue Book. And but he was, as I said, he was involved in 3 encounters where they tracked these high-flying, fast-moving objects, and they would sort of suddenly stop at heights of like 40,000 feet and just hover, and then shoot away at like 800 miles an hour, which, you know, nobody was flying anything like that back then. And my dad actually kept quiet about this. I think he only told my mum about it. But other than that, I didn't know about it till I was about 13, maybe something like that. And that was one of the things that got me interested in all of this. You know, not just because it was my dad, but also because he was, you know, he was a trained radar mechanic in the military.
Right.
And as I said, you know, if you ask him about it today, he'll tell it just as it was, which is that we tracked these weird things. They clearly weren't aircraft, and the commanders in the base basically told everybody, you won't talk about this, and he didn't for a long time. And so, you know, it's sort of an intriguing story, and one of the things that sort of got me involved in all this.
Neat. Very, very neat.
So, on the subject of UFOs, I think we would be remiss if I didn't bring up that Nick actually has another book coming out on October 1st about the Martians and evidence of life on the red planet. So this is brand new. It just came across while we were preparing the show. Could you tell us, can you share anything about this book besides published date?
Yeah, I actually can. It isn't out till October, but it's already on Amazon. And it's just called The Martians, and then it has the subtitle, which sort of basically describes what the book's about. And if you go to the Amazon page, you'll see there's like bullet points of all the different aspects of what's in the book. And it basically looks at Mars as a, I won't say a dead world, but you know, not too far away from that. And it looks at the sort of the ancient structure type structures that have been seen on Mars, you know, everything from the face on Mars to what appears to be sort of ancient, semi-destroyed pyramid type constructions. And some of the photographs that have even come back from NASA, which seem to show objects on Mars that don't seem to be just naturally formed. And so it looks at the theories and the ideas that Mars could once have been a thriving world like ours. You know, maybe something happened, nuclear war or some sort of huge disaster that didn't necessarily wipe out, you know, everything on Mars, but possibly, you know, I think there's good evidence that there is life on Mars. There's some actually really intriguing photographs which seem to show like bushes and trees and things like that. If you Google banyan trees, B-A-N-Y-A-N, banyan trees and Mars, you'll see these aerial photographs from NASA which look just like trees and bushes, as if you're looking out of a window going in a plane going over Arizona or something. But NASA says you know, it's nothing to do. It's just like a trick of the light. But they look kind of like alien trees. That's the only way I can describe it. So, and it kind of draws also parallels between some of the, like the face on Mars and these pyramid type structures. It parallels them with you know, the ancient Egypt here, you know, and then it sort of progresses into the potential connections between ancient Mars and ancient Earth. You know, was there some sort of interaction, and could there even be, you know, sort of the last of the Martians? You know, could they be deep underground, you know, in tunnels, caverns, just, you know, trying to frantically hang on, you know? So,
never know.
So it covers like a lot, the whole history of the Martian anomalies, if you like.
Neat. Definitely have to check that one out.
And that'll be, as I said, October, but 1st of October. But it might come out a little bit earlier than that. So.
I've already got it on pre-order.
Yeah, that one might be. Yeah, I think last time, the last book I did with them, it did come, which is Red Wheel. I think that came out a little bit earlier, so maybe this one will as well.
Nice. All right, now a question that we get a lot, or it kind of came up when we did our werewolf show the other day. Dogman, is it a were-type animal like a werewolf, or is it its own entity? What are your thoughts?
Well, I've written a lot about the Dogman phenomenon, and I think a lot of people call it the Dogman because they do anything they can to not use the W word. The W word being, the W word being werewolf. Because I think, when people think of werewolves, they think of like Hollywood movies, like American Werewolf in London and The Howling, which are all good fun entertainment. But people think of werewolves, they think of somebody bursting out of their clothes at a full moon and turning into this monster that kills a bunch of kids in the woods, like these.
I hate when that happens.
Yeah.
So these sort of low budget werewolf movies or whatever. But I do believe there is a genuine Dogman phenomenon. Now, when you look at the stories, they do look like what you would call a werewolf. However, if you look at the reports, there actually aren't hardly any reports. I think maybe 2 or 3, and those are kind of questionable. There's hardly any reports where people have seen or claim to have seen a human turning into like a dogman or a dogman turning into a human. There's hardly anything like that. People just see them as these large wolf-like animals that have the ability to run and walk on back legs or on all 4 legs. So I find that interesting, the idea of like a bipedal wolf, that has the ability to run and walk on 4 limbs and 2 limbs. And I mean, there are some animals do that. I mean, for example, bears will do that. Granted, they won't do it for much time, but, for the most part, a bear walks on 4 limbs, but, they will stand up and look around and kind of walk a little bit on their back legs. So, I think it's a real phenomenon. But what also particularly intrigues me is the locations where they're often seen, like graveyards, cemeteries, particularly in Wisconsin and places like that. They're seen around old ancient burial mounds. There's a lot of reports in the UK as well, where I grew up in, and they're often seen around old stone circles, not around Stonehenge, I should stress, which is the most famous of all the ancient stone circles in the UK, but there's actually hundreds of smaller ones, and the Dogman reports have been seen in those locations. So in other words, what I find interesting is the locations where these creatures are often seen. They're often like sacred ancient sites, as I said, whether it's like Stonehenge type places,
or an Indian mound.
Yeah, the mounds, and also places that are traditionally tied to the paranormal, like old bridges and crossroads, which often pop up in supernatural tales. So I think there's some kind of supernatural aspect to these creatures. In some respects, they're not too dissimilar to the so-called skinwalker creatures, which again have sort of a wolfish appearance and can walk on 4 limbs and 2. So I don't think we're dealing with an unknown animal in the same way that the gorilla was once an unknown animal until we found them, and were able to confirm what they were. So I don't think the skinwalker, I don't believe that the Dogman is just an unknown animal. I think there's like a paranormal aspect to whatever they are. And what it is. I mean, Linda Godfrey, a good friend of mine, she's written, I think, 6 books about the Dogman.
She's wonderful.
Now.
Yeah, we love her.
And Linda's does some really good stuff. She's a really good writer and researcher, and she, has sort of followed all the different theories. The connections to Native American lore and legend, and the supernatural aspect. And also the idea of these things being sort of multi-dimensional things that can kind of flit in and out of our reality from their realms. I find, for me, that the Dogman is, it's relatively new in terms of visibility, about sort of 20 years now, thereabouts. But, in sort of some of the cultures, Native American cultures and things like that, I mean, they've known of them for centuries. It's just that the term Dogman really, is what caught people's eye, and why it's really kind of took off in the last decade or so.
Right, like the Beast of Bray Road and that type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm still going to put it out there, though. If anybody finds a litter of the little puppies, I'm first in line for adoption.
Well, you might not say that when they get to like about 7 feet tall and thrashing around the room.
And they need raw meat.
120-pound German Shepherds, so yeah. we feed them mailmen and other delivery type people.
That's
it's
horrible.
All good.
Oh God.
But well, Jake, what are you looking at there, bub?
Well, because we were talking about Dogman and everything, so of course I've got all of Nick's books, so I pulled out my copy of Shapeshifters, Morphing Monsters, and Changing Cryptids. So the whole thing that I'm most interested in, and I know we're running short on time, is just when it comes to cryptids, and we're now in a monitoring heavy culture. We have cameras everywhere and drones everywhere. Has the rate of incidents picked up more recently? Hence, that's what's spurring everyone. There's a big interest in paranormal things now. And is it just because the visibility, because there's more eyewitness accounts? Or do you think, you were talking about synchronicities, is there just some kind of change coming?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, what I would say is that there's no doubt that the interest in all of this has changed, certainly within about the last 10, 15 years. I mean, certainly if you went back 20 years, and roughly, I would say 15 years ago, maybe slightly less than that, if you talked about UFOs or Bigfoot, people would look at you as if, you're just crazy. But today, I mean, paranormal TV, magazines, books, podcasts, you name it, they're incredibly popular. But the important thing is it's not just popular, it's actually seen as quite acceptable to say, what do you do on weekends? Oh, I go looking for Bigfoot, and people say, oh, that's cool, that's interesting. Whereas before they'd say, okay, get away from me.
Yeah, exactly.
What's wrong with you?
It's like, it's like, officer.
Yep.
But I mean, not quite like that, but certainly 15 years ago, thereabouts, it was just, you get a life, that kind of thing. But today, I mean, like, for example, you can find on mainstream media, New York Times a couple of years ago ran, that big story that exposed this UFO program in the U.S. government. I mean, that was, major media. So I think that's one of the important things about how and why this has become so popular, because it's become legitimized, and there isn't this aura of eccentricity or whatever. It's just seen as, wow, this is cool, tell me what you saw, that sort of thing. But also, there's the visibility of, anyone can, put out a book or, a show, put on a conference, and we've all got the ability to do this thanks to technology. So I think, that's that's an important aspect. I mean, I wasn't around, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and whatever, but I do know, the people who did UFO research then, it must have been really difficult. They get a sighting report and they had to sort of type a letter out and, go to the post office and send it to the local UFO group, and then they send a letter back to you thanking you and all this business, difficult to get the word out, and there was no sense of immediate communication, and that has helped a lot, and I think you combine all that together, the legitimacy that surrounds it all now, the interest, people aren't frightened or embarrassed to talk about what they're interested in, whether Bigfoot or whatever. And there's so much visibility, everywhere you look. So for me, that's a good thing, But I think, also, technology. We've all got cell phones, and there's a lot of interesting pictures have turned up. Maybe not as many as people might think. We've all got an iPhone, but very often, people just forget, they're so startled, they see something, they forget to take a picture. That actually does happen, But, we've all got a phone, but we're just standing there with your mouth wide open looking at that big neck coming out the water.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I would be so mad at myself. Yeah. I'd be so mad at myself if that happened.
Someone get me a lasso and a saddle.
He says that sitting in his chair at home.
Yes, guarded by 3 pit bulls. Yes.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on again. It's just been so much fun, and the time goes by way too fast.
That it does.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad we got over the tech issue, whatever it is, and
oh, sure. There's always a way around.
Yeah. But well, thanks for having me on. I think we covered a lot of ground, a lot of areas, and
can't wait for your books to come out.
Yeah. So let me do a quick recap. So Nick's book Monsters of the Deep arrives on August 4th from New Page Publishing. It's 400 pages, over 100 monster profiles. It'll be amazing. He also has another book, The Martians, which arrives October 1st from, I believe it's New Page. Is what I saw on Amazon.
It used to be New Page, but what happened is New Page joined up with another company called Red Wheel. And Red Wheel basically now runs New Page.
Got it.
But I actually have one more book coming out this summer.
Just what?
But that's what I absolutely cannot talk about at all.
Top secret.
But it's going to be very controversial. Put it that way.
Perfect.
That'll be fun.
You can't even a little bait.
As soon as the word's out, though, I'll let you know. So.
Aliens, conspiracies, famous people dying. I'm just trying to.
Give it up, Jake. Give it up.
I know. He's sworn to secrecy. The Illuminati will come after him.
Well, Nick, how do other people get a hold of you if they're wanting to just chat or pick your brain on something?
Well, I have a blog which I try and do something on it once a day. Sometimes I don't succeed in that, but the blog's called World of Whatever. So if you just Google Nick Redfern World of Whatever blog, that'll take you to my blog. People can reach me at Twitter, which is Nick Redfern UFO. And just send me a Facebook message. And as I said, I'm always happy to chat with people. I'm not one of these kind of standoffish, egotistic authors, and I can tell you there are quite a few of them, unfortunately.
We've run into some of those too.
Yes.
Yeah, but my view is that if people take the time, to buy my books, I feel it's important to give them back something as well, whether it's hanging out at the bar at a conference and chatting with somebody for 15 minutes, and it makes their day kind of thing, And
Sure.
I think, and I like doing that as, hanging out with everybody. I don't be one of these authors who just goes to his room after the conference. I mean, what's the point,
Right.
So if anybody's ever got, any questions, or they want to share an experience, or they might want someone who can explain the experience, or how can they get into the subjects or whatever, I'm always happy to take the time, to talk to people, and you can make great friends that way as well.
Absolutely.
People who
That's
just
true.
contact you, about this or that. 6 months later, they're one of your close friends or whatever. So.
Mm-hmm.
Very true.
That happens a lot too, and I'm happy about
Yeah.
that.
And we do
There's
have
a
Nick's
good social scene in all this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've got Nick's contact information is on the Mystic Moon webpage for this broadcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacob.
Marvelous. All right.
Okay.
Well, I guess we're down to the time then. And Nick, once again, thank you so much
Yes.
for taking the time
Yay.
talking with us.
Well,
Yes.
Thanks so
thanks for
much.
having me on. Thank you.
It
Sure.
was awesome.
Sure.
Thank you.
And let's see, next week we have Ghost Tech Paranormal. And the following week I'm working on a couple angles, and I'll let you know as soon as I know.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
June, what you got coming up?
Oh, I'm just going to be staying at home. Looks like that's
Like
going to be
all of
about
us.
my life.
Yes, like
yeah,
all of
everybody
us.
else's life. So, yeah, just, well, we have spookedinseattle.com if you're interested. Ross Allison is going to be speaking Friday night about haunted toys. So please tune in for that. Look up at spookedinseattle.com and check that out. That'll be fun.
Jake?
Well, my life, I'm in the busy season of the day job since I'm a pharmaceutical analyst, so I'll be doing a wonderful autoimmune cross-correlational analysis. That's my life for, yeah, there's a lot
Say
of
that
math.
4 times
I'm
real
glad I
fast.
studied economics, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, you've also got your blogs, though. That
I do, yep. I haven't,
Daily activities.
yeah, so since the day job's been keeping me from publishing, but I did recently publish some stuff on the Kraken on my website, monstersontheweb.com. And then I put in my how to do an old school ghost hunt on my main blog, Ghostly Activities.
I read that. It was really good.
I'm glad you liked it. I put up the samples of what it actually sounds like to try to record
That's pretty
EVPs
awesome.
on an RCA cassette recorder. My, have times
fun.
changed.
Yes. Oh, thank goodness that's no more.
Yeah.
all right, Jake. What music do we have taking us out tonight?
So, on theme, the track is Monsters and the artist is Shinedown, because you know how much we love aggressive rock.
That's right.
Yes.
All right.
So with
Thank
that,
you, everybody. Stay home. Stay safe.
Yes.
Wash your hands.
yeah,
Yes.
wash your damn hands.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Off into your elbow. Okay. All right, folks. With that, have a
All
good
right.
night. Take
Good
care.
talk to you
night.
later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.